Okay, thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for letting me, and that's precisely why I need you guys to watch this and let me know if I'm doing something wrong. There we go. I've turned on the microphone now, so you should be able to hear me. So let me go through that again. Let me go through from the beginning. So what we have in this sentence, take two. So what we have in this sentence is a bit of a mess. If we ask ourselves the main question, what is the main message here? Well, to do that, we have to read the sentence, reread this sentence, try to work out what's going on, and if we're lucky, we'll then get the idea of the sentence, the main message of the sentence. So in order to get the main message, what we have to do is try to find, if it's possible to, try to find the elements of the active voice, the subject, the verb, and the object. So let's try to do that with this sentence. A claim which in the case of negligent misconduct shall not exceed £500, and in the case of intentional misconduct shall not exceed £1,000. Thank you. I'm glad you can hear me now. May be filed with the office of the administrator by any injured party. So if we have a look at the sentence first off, we've got a claim, and you're thinking, okay, this might be our subject. Straight away, we've got an interruption. A claim which in the case of negligent misconduct and in the case of intentional misconduct. So we've got two pieces of information which block us from getting to the main message, which is a claim may be filed with the office of the administrator by any injured party. So we continue to read and we see that we've got a passive structure here. And the passive structure, well, if we've got a passive structure, straight away we know that the order of the sentence would be subject, verb, object. So we've got the subject, now the object, which is a claim. We've got the verb structure, which is may be filed. Then we've got two pieces of information with the office of the administrator by any injured party. So we've got to ask ourselves, which one of those two agents is our subject? Which one of those two agents may file the claim? And of course, it's the injured party. But where we have misuse of the passive, it's not always clear to work out who the agent is. And this is another reason why we've got to be very careful with the passive. In my video, which I have a look at the passive, I go through the three main rules for using the passive, which are, if we don't know who the subject is, we should use the passive. If the action is more important than the person doing it, then we should use the passive. Or if we want to create distance between the person who's doing something and the thing that's being done. For example, if you've done something wrong, then it would be brave of you to say, I did something wrong. Normally what would happen would be you would use the passive voice to say something was done wrong, and so you distance yourself from that action. And those are the three main rules for using the passive. But here in this context, without going into too much detail, I don't think any of those rules are met, which means that we're misusing the passive, which means that this really should be in the active voice. And if we break this down in the active voice, it is an injured party may file a claim with the office of the administrator. So you've got, in order to get the active voice, which is the clearest form and the easiest form of communication, we've got to go 100% backwards and then jump around a little bit. So we've got to go from the end of the sentence to the middle of the sentence to the beginning of the sentence, back to the middle of the sentence in order to understand the main message, which is kind of a crazy way of communicating. No one in normal natural language communicates in that way which you have to finish a sentence, and then the listener or the reader then has to analyze your sentence to work out what it is you're trying to say. As I said, it's a slightly crazy way of communicating, and it's not very natural. In the example that I give in the video that I do on the active voice, which is the most important rule of communication, I say that people would normally say, I ate breakfast. People wouldn't say, breakfast was eaten by me. It's not a normal or a natural thing to say. So, but the problem with legal writing and other forms of writing, whether it's business writing, academic writing, or even general writing sometimes, is that people don't always come up with the obvious and clear answer or piece of writing straight away. Normally, this requires a process of writing, checking, redrafting, checking again, and possibly even redrafting. The answer, you've seen it already because I've shown you already, this is an injured party may file a claim with the office of the administrator. The next sentence says, a claim shall not exceed £500 for negligent misconduct nor £1,000 for intentional misconduct. This seems rather obvious, this sentence structure, but experience tells me that not everyone gets to this end place after their first draft. Normally this happens after a process of redrafting or questioning by someone else. And that's something that I've experienced a lot when I've worked with lawyers, where I get, when I'm proofreading documents, then I get a piece of writing and I don't know what's happening, or I'm not clear what's happening. And I ask the lawyer, what are you really trying to say? And the lawyer says, Simon, basically I'm saying this, 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 this. And I say to the lawyer, well, why didn't you write what you just told me? Because I understand what you're telling me, but I don't understand what you've written. And that for me clearly shows that this obvious correction, which is very easy to understand, is not something that you can do straight away. This is something that requires awareness of rules. You need skill in order to create a sentence like this. And more importantly, you need time and practice in order to get to this final result. In the book by Brian Garner, this is an example taken from Brian Garner's book. He says, if it's possible, ask someone else to read your documents and listen to what they say. If it's not possible to ask someone else, leave your writing on your desk for half an hour or an hour, come back to it with a fresh mind, and ask yourself, question your own writing, ask yourself, what am I really trying to say? And when you do that, you go through the process of analyzing your own writing. And it only happens after this process. As I said, the best writers, whether it's legal writers, whether it's storytellers, never publish their first drafts, because they know the first draft is only a framework idea, a framework document to put down ideas, to put something on a piece of paper, and then to work with that information, to change it, to edit it, to make it sound better, to apply lots of different rules. So your first draft is never going to be the best draft. It's when you ask yourself, what am I really trying to say, that you then get down to a better draft and a better draft and a better draft. So active voice, simplest way to communicate, simple sentence structures, putting information in different sentences, and keeping your sentences as under 25 words per sentence as an average would be essential basic rules in order to improve your legal writing. And sentences is what we're going to have a look at next. What we have here is one sentence, which is about 50 to 60 words long. Client recognizes that company's personnel providing services to client under this agreement may perform similar services from time to time for other entities or individuals, which entities or individuals may even be in the same or similar business as the client, and this agreement shall not prevent company from using such personnel for the performance of such similar service for such other entities or individuals. You can't say it in one breath. And my general rule of thumb is that if you can't say it using one breath, then there's no way you're going to understand it easily. You've got to read this sentence as you're reading, you're just getting hit with information. One point, another point, a third point, a fourth point, and you're becoming quickly overloaded with information. It's impossible for you to deal with information, with that amount of information in one go. And this is unless you're able to train your memory, or unless you're able to train your brain to deal with lots of information in one go, we're unable to do this. And this is precisely why we, for example, with telephone numbers in Poland, a mobile number is about, or a cell phone number is about 9 digits long. And the common process to remember a mobile phone number is to break that 9-digit number into 3 parts. 3 parts with 3 numbers. This is a process which is called chunking. And we can remember 3 parts, but we can't remember 1 part with 9 digits. In the United Kingdom, I think the phone numbers are, you've got a code of 5 numbers at the beginning, or up to 5 numbers at the beginning, and then you've got about 5 or 6 or even 7 numbers at the end. So you've got a number which is potentially about, I think, 11 or 12 numbers long. And so the way that we deal with that number in order to remember that is to chunk it into smaller pieces. And that's precisely in writing, that's what sentences allow us to do. They allow us to chunk information into smaller pieces so that we can understand what's going on, so that we can draw logical links and conclusions and see the relationship between sentences. When we're presented with a sentence which is over 25 words long, the science tells us that anything over 25 words long begins to be a bit of a challenge for us, and certainly anything over 30 or 40 words long is a real challenge. This is something that normal people, everyday people, have lots of difficulty dealing with. So when you've got a sentence which is a lengthy sentence, you have to understand that the person who's reading that sentence, or as you know, when you read legal documents, it's really, really difficult to understand what a sentence is trying to say, to understand all the points the sentence is trying to make when you're dealing with a long sentence. So the key to sentences is, one, to keep the sentences as an average across the document under 25 words. This is to allow us to process and to see the relationships between the sentences and to see the logical connections, which is particularly important if you're arguing or persuading or either a client or a judge. And the second thing is to limit the amount of points which are communicated in each sentence. So the general rule is 1 point per sentence, or when you've got a sentence made up of a subclause and a main clause, 1 point per clause, 2 points per sentence. So what we have to do to this sentence is we have to break it down into the parts, into the individual points that it's trying to make. And so we might be able to do that, and that process might be an easy process, but that process might be a difficult process. In this particular case, it wasn't that challenging. At least I hope it wasn't that challenging. The first sentence could be this. Client recognizes that company's personnel providing services to client under this agreement may perform similar services from time to time for other entities or individuals. 1 point, 1 sentence. The next sentence, the entities or individuals may even be in the same or similar business as the client. 1 point, another sentence. This agreement shall not prevent company from using such personnel for the performance of such similar service with such other entities or individuals. Another point, another sentence. By breaking down our original sentence into 3 different sentences, you can see there the amount of words per sentence, 25 words, 16 words, and 23 words. And across the document, we've got an average of 21 words. There's a mistake there in my presentation, 21 words per sentence, not per sentences. So what we've done is we've brought the amount of words as an average down below 25, which in theory means that this is a lot easier to understand than one long sentence. It is a different discussion to say, what can we do with the words here? Can we redraft? Can we say things in a simpler way? Can we lose some language which we don't need? Yes, of course we can. I didn't want to go, and that's perhaps something that you would like to do if you would like to challenge yourselves to redraft this to even reduce the word count further. Then please go ahead and leave your answers in the comments section, and I'll be happy to get back to you with feedback about how well you did. So we could bring the average down a lot lower by redrafting, by asking ourselves the main message: what are we really trying to say? But the correction in this sentence was about breaking a long sentence down into shorter sentences. Now, I said at the beginning it might be easy, it might be difficult. What I meant by it might be easy is that here it seems pretty clear. We've got this structure which says which entities or individuals, which I redrafted to be the entities or individuals. And that was probably the only change that I made to this text. So it seemed pretty clear to me where each point was. And it might seem clear to you, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're correct. And this comes back to bad drafting at the beginning, because in my experience with working with lawyers, when I've broken down the long sentence, because I don't know what's going on, so I get a long sentence, I don't understand what's happening, so I contact the lawyer and I say, okay, are you trying to say this? And I break down his message or her message into sentences. And the lawyer, from time to time, has said to me, no, Simon, you've got it wrong. That's not what I'm trying to say. And so that tells me, okay, I've broken down the sentences. I've broken down the long sentence into individual sentences in a way which seems clear to me, but evidently this is not what the author was trying to communicate. So here we have an example of not just that long sentences are difficult to understand because they're long sentences, but long sentence could be difficult to understand from the point of view you might understand it incorrectly. And of course, that's not the fault of the reader or the listener, that's the fault of the drafter, the author of the document. So that's also something that you've got to bear in mind when you're writing documents, is that if you're using long sentences, you may inadvertently, mistakenly mislead the person who's reading your writing, which of course, within a legal context or a business context, is not something that you want to do. So it's another argument for keeping your sentences as short as possible. And you might think, okay, short sentences, not very legal, not very professional, seems a bit childish to me. I think legal writing should be perhaps a little bit more formal, and it should present itself as more formal. And that would be an argument if the legal profession, such as judges, bar associations, private companies, private legal departments, etc., didn't say that that is a bad idea. And certainly modern legal drafting practice tells us that we need short sentences, but it's not just modern legal drafting practice. There were many judges over the past century that have said many times to advocates in particular, keep your sentences short. Lord Denning is the perfect example, and I give you a number of examples of his short sentences in my video, which looks at sentence length, which you'll find on YouTube. So there are lots and lots of strong arguments to keeping short sentences. Okay, let's have a look at the third example, which was this. Where there is no express agreement by the parties, it is the ruling by the courts that the authority was to continue for what was a reasonable time in light of all of the circumstances. Where there is no express agreement by the parties, it is the ruling by the courts that the authority was to continue for what was a reasonable time in light of all the circumstances. I'm reading that and I'm reading that and I'm thinking there's something not right here. There's a language structure which is being used which is stopping me from easily understanding what's going on here. There's just, sometimes when you read a sentence, you just have a feeling that there's something not quite right with the sentence. You get the feeling that it could be expressed in a much easier and a much better way. And then you have this sense of frustration that you're not exactly sure what the message is, because there's something in that sentence that's trying to stop you to getting to the main message. And it's quite an interesting thing in this sentence that's stopping you, and I'll show you what it might be, or at least what it is for me. It's this use, I've highlighted the uses of be here, where there is no express agreement by the parties. It is the ruling by the court that the authority was to continue for what was a reasonable time in light of all of the circumstances. So we've got these structures, was, that kind of block you from getting to the main message. Now, we've got a number of different uses of be here for a number of different reasons. But the main reason here is what we would call expletives, grammar expletives. Expletives not meaning rude words in the normal sense, but expletives in terms of grammar, which refer to this structure, particularly the first two, where you say there is ... it is ... Now, expletives are used for the purpose of emphasis. So it is the reason why something. There is no express agreement, something. So we use them. This is a legitimate grammar structure. It's a tool that we use for emphasis. But when we overuse it, then it makes the sentence really, really heavy and really, really difficult to understand. And of course, we don't have to use it. There is another way to redraft the sentence without using expletives. So if we ask ourselves what's going on, what's the main message in this sentence, first of all, let's try to identify what our subjects, verbs, and objects. If we have a look at the first clause, it says where there is no express agreement by the parties. So parties, clearly our subject. No express agreement is our object, which means our verb structure. What's our verb structure? We've got is as a verb and no. So we need some kind of negative verb structure. But we also have to bear in mind sentence structure, because this is a subclause where there is no express agreement by the parties, comma, ... and what follows is the main clause. So is there another way to say where there is no agreement? What is where? What is where is no express agreement trying to communicate? Well, this is a hypothetical structure. And with hypothetical structures, you can use one word which everyone understands and which has a clear legal meaning, as I understand it, and that everyone will know what you're trying to say. And that, of course, is if. So if there is no express, if the parties don't agree, we could say something like this. Or if the parties do not expressly agree. Well, there's a number of different options that we have available to us. And then afterwards it says, it is the ruling by the courts that the authority was to continue for what was a reasonable time in light of all of the circumstances. So let's try to find our subject here. And the subject here is court. So what does the subject do? What's our verb? Our verb is rule. So courts rule, or courts decide, or courts hold, or something along those lines. In other words, courts have decided how to do something. So if we were to apply that thinking, we would say the courts held, or the courts have decided that the authority was to continue for what was a reasonable reasonable time in light of all of the circumstances. How can we redraft that? Well, we can simply say, by asking ourselves what's the main message, we can simply say the courts have decided the authorities may continue, can continue for a reasonable time in light of all of the circumstances. So we can easily find other ways of saying that. And if we have a look at this corrected sentence, if the parties don't expressly agree, of course, we don't. If you're writing to a client, if you're writing this in a memo, please don't use the contraction. Please just say if the parties do not expressly agree. This, if the one legal style writing tip for legal writing is that it's characterized by the fact that contractions are not used. So if the parties do not expressly agree, most courts hold that the authority continues for a reasonable time in light of all of the circumstances. So, with a quick redraft, by asking ourselves what's the main message here, we get rid of that difficult grammar structure with is, was, to something which is a lot easier to understand. And of course, if we go back to our rules on sentences, where we say 1 point per clause, two clauses per sentence, that's exactly what we've got here with this conditional structure. If the parties don't expressly agree, that's our first clause. Most courts hold that the authority continues for a reasonable time in light of all of the circumstances. That's our second point in our second clause. And here we meet the rules for sentences as well. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you have any questions, if you disagree with anything that I've said, or if you've got any, you want to ask me anything at all about these questions, then please let me know. Get in contact with me either on YouTube or on Facebook, or send me an email through my website, and I'll be more than happy to get into that discussion with you, because all corrections that we have a look at in these webinars and that I have a look at on my website are open to interpretation. Obviously, we don't have the full context, and more context would inevitably help us. But that's the whole idea of correcting legal writing, is that bad legal writing is open to interpretation. And unless we can actually talk to the author who wrote it, then there's no way for certain that we can know exactly what was being said, or what the intended main message was. Okay, I'll be back again later on this week with another webinar, I think on Friday morning. So I'll post some more questions for you on Facebook today or tomorrow, and I'll see you again at the end of the week. Thank you very much, and goodbye.